Today I'm going to show you guys how I make this super cute corset or bustier, whatever you want to call it, out of denim. I bought these jeans from Hotbins for only $4. It was so much fabric. I ended up getting 3 tops and a purse out of it. I start by opening up the jeans. I like to cut the jeans open with the side seam. I'm going to open up the legs so that the fabric can lay flat and I can cut out my pattern. So now I'm just cutting out my first pattern piece. I wanted that seam to be part of the final design, so that's why I'm laying my pattern on there like that. This fabric is thicker than me, so that's why sometimes the rotary tool doesn't cut it and I have to bring out the scissors. Once I cut out the first piece, I just flip it onto the other leg to cut out the same piece but for the other side. I've made this top like at least 4 times by now, so just trust me and trust the process. Now I'm just gonna cut out pattern pieces 2 and 3. Once I cut them for one side, then I flip that pattern piece over and cut it out for the other side. Two things to note, sometimes the denim has different shades, so you see how that part is lighter, so if you want the whole piece to be the same, make sure you're kind of like paying attention to those colors so you don't end up with one random panel that's super light while the rest of your corset is kind of darker. Also, denim kind of has lines, so you kind of want to put the pattern piece like parallel with the lines because you don't want to have the grain, I guess, being diagonal on some pieces. So as you can see here, all like my pattern pieces are done and all the grains are straight on it. So far I have 6 pieces total. I put the final pattern that I use in the description, but if you want to alter the pattern or make it from scratch on your own, this is how I created the pattern for the cups. I just take a cup that is already pre-made. I buy these at a fabric store in Miami. And then I just tape it up with some painter's tape. And then I am going to draw my pattern on. I draw my pattern into 3 shapes. I have the top strip. And then that middle piece, I kind of just put it in half. Usually I kind of make one side a little bigger than the other side. So now that the pattern's drawn, I'm just going to peel the tape off of the bralette cup and then cut my pattern out. So I'm cutting that top strip and then I'm cutting the bottom pattern piece down the middle pretty much. So then I put it on some paper and just trace around it about 1/4 of an inch. That way I have some seam allowance. And yes, although I have a perfectly good table to cut this pattern out on, I still sit on the floor and break my back every time. But yeah, I'm cutting my pattern out and I'm going to label my pattern also left and right and then what's the top and the bottom because I want to make sure that I don't get them confused. And yeah, anytime I sew cups, I always do a test one first to make sure it looks good. So here there was kind of loose fabric in the middle, so I fixed that. It's already fixed on the pattern in the description. I had already cut out this side, so now I'm going to flip it and cut out for my other cup. Like I said, I already did one as a test one, so here I'm going to show you how to sew it completely from start to finish for the second cup. So here's my pattern pieces. That's what it should look like. So I'm going to take the 2 triangles, put them together, and then I'm going to pin them down the middle and sew that first. So I'm going to sew that with a straight line. I sew it about 1/4 inch from the side. Perfectionist, you know, it's all about quality. So I'm going to push the seams to one side and sew that down with a straight stitch too, just so it looks nice and professional. Next, I'm going to sew the top strip onto what I had just sewn. So I'm going to start with both ends. So I put a clip on each end and then I clip in the middle. And then I add a few more clips and I'm going to sew this with a straight stitch as well with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to do the same thing I did to this seam, which is pretty much fold the seams upward and then do a straight stitch on top just so that the seams stay in place and lay nice and flat. Okay, let's get started on the panels now. So I'm just going to take all the panels and pin them together. But yes, here's all 6 of my panels pinned or clipped together. When I sew all these panels together, I need a seam allowance that's about a half an inch to 3/4 of an inch. The reason for this is because I'm going to put boning and I need to make the boning channels, so it needs to be wide enough so that the boning fits in it. So pretty much I just sew the panels together with a straight stitch at about a half an inch or 3/4 of an inch seam allowance, and then I fold over that flap and that creates the boning channel when I sew it down. Here I'm just sewing all of the panels together with a straight stitch. The seam down the middle is the only one that I won't be adding boning to later. To keep these flaps from fraying, I'm just going to serge them with my serger. If you don't have a serger, you could sew the ends with a zigzag stitch. I always try to serge the raw edges of any denim project that I'm working on that I don't want fraying in. So now that these ends are all nice and neat, I'm just going to fold them down to create the boning channels. So this middle seam here, I don't need to fold it down because I'm not going to add boning there. But these two on the side, I'm going to add boning. So I'm just going to sew down it with a straight stitch and just make that channel wide enough so that the boning fits inside. I'm just putting the boning on top of my project to make sure that I'm sewing the channel wide enough. And again, I'm just doing a straight stitch down the two sides for the boning channel. Now I'm gonna finish the cup, so I'm just taking the inner part of the cup and matching that up with the right side of the fabric. Fabric should be bigger than the cup, so I'm just making sure that the foam cup is just centered in the middle of the fabric. And I'm just gonna clip it at the top of both cups. Once that looks good, I'm just gonna take it to my sewing machine and do a straight stitch at the top where I just clipped. Here's what that looked like when I was done, and then I'm just gonna flip the fabric over to create the cup. And then I just serged where I had just sewn just to secure it, but honestly I'll probably skip this step next time because I really do not like to sew thick fabric with my serger because I already broke one sewing thick fabric before. After I flip the fabric over to cover the front of the cups, I'm just going to pull the fabric flat around the edge of the bottom of the cup and clip around it to keep it in place. So when I do this, I'm just trying to make sure that the fabric is flat around the edges and pulling it to make sure there's no wrinkles and it's nice and tight on there. Once that looks good, I'm just going to take it to my sewing machine and sew around it with a straight stitch, and I try to get as close as I can to the edge, so I'm pretty much sewing right on the edge of the cup to join the cup and the fabric together. Okay, if this part isn't perfect. This part is always so satisfying to me because this is when the top starts to look so cute. And now it is time to add the cup to the panel. So this piece, I don't like to have too much thick fabric at the same spot, so that's why I line up the seam of the cup and the seam of the denim kind of side by side and not like on top of each other. But when I sew around the cup, it's not so much thick fabric right in that one spot. So for me, this is the hardest part of the corset is just getting these cups in and making sure that they're both even. Times when I sew these tops, one of the cups will end up being a little higher than the other one, and then at this step I seam rip it and try it again, so don't feel discouraged if yours do not come out even on the first try. So now that I have it clipped around, I'm going to sew around there with a straight stitch. The goal is to sew through the cup, through the fabric on the cup, and through the fabric on the panels. I try to sew above the sewing line that's already there from when we sewed the fabric to the cup. This way that stitching isn't showing on the outside of the cup. This part can be a little challenging, but don't give up. I promise that once you master it, you'll be so happy It took me a couple times to get it, but once you get it, you got it for life. It's like riding a bike. So right here, I had a little wrinkle. So I'm just gonna seam rip that small part and then just stitch over it and flatten it out. I'm just adding the other cup. And here's what I mean when I say you want to sew above that original stitch, so that way it doesn't show on the outside. So once I sew my cups on and they look nice and even, I'm just going to trim this excess fabric. I tried serging this just to make it look nice and neat, but honestly that was a bad idea because I ended up breaking a needle, but thank God I did not break my machine. So then I had to play Bob the Builder and fix it, but I fixed it and it's good now. To make this top look even more professional, I'm going to add an extra stitch here underneath the cups to have the fabric lay flat. When I'm sewing denim and I get to a really thick part like this, I like to turn the side knob to manually make the needle go, and this just helps to not break my machine. Here's what the cup looks like with that stitch underneath. Now it's time to hem the top, so I'm just going to tuck this middle part in and straight stitch there. Then I'm going to serge that part, fold it over, and straight stitch there. So here I'm just going to sew it down, and I just try to make sure that it's nice and even. Again, if it's not even, I'm just going to seam rip it and do it again. I did have to do this part twice to make it nice and straight. For the sides here, first I had trimmed them a little bit to make them even, and then I'm just going to serge the top. I like to add elastic when I'm hemming the top and the bottom of the corsets. This just helps to make it like a snug fit, especially if you're working with denim that has stretch to it. Then elastic is linked below in the description. So now I'm going to fold over the edges and just sew it down with a straight stitch. Now I'm just going to clean up the bottom here and make it nice and even. So I'm just cutting off any excess fabric and then I'm folding it in half to make sure both sides are even and just making the bottom curve how I want it to curve. As a double check, I just measure the length of each side where the boning is just to make sure that it's even on both sides. So now I'm going to add the boning. I don't add the boning all the way to the bottom. I stop about a half an inch or an inch before the bottom of the corset. This is because I'm going to need to fold the bottom to hem it. So I just make sure that the boning is good for both sides, and then I cut two pieces out, one for each side. And I like to file the edges of the boning with a nail file just so that it softens the edges and they don't poke through the fabric. So now that the boning is in there, I can hem the bottom of the corset. I'm going to hem the bottom just like I did the top, so I serge it first with some elastic. The elastic is optional. Please, serging it is optional too, but I just like to make it as professional as I can. So once that's serged, I'm just going to fold over the edge and sew it down with a straight stitch. I'm just adding that straight stitch to the bottom. And again, any thick parts, I sew over it manually. The last thing that I need to sew is just an area to put the grommets in, so I'm just folding over the edge of the corset twice. I fold it in about an inch and then an inch again. Using a straight stitch, I just sew around this area, making a rectangle. And I'm going to do that for both sides. I use a washable marker to mark 5 dots on each of the sides. Dots are where I'm going to place my grommets at. Just do my best to make sure that they're spaced out evenly. Sometimes I'll just measure it and make sure that it's all nice and even. Now I'm going to put small holes where I just put the dots. I want them just big enough so that the grommets fit through. Just use my seam ripper and some scissors to do this. Sometimes this can take a little bit of time. I got this grommet tool off of Amazon and I love it so much. Before I would just use a hammer to add the grommets, but it was so loud, so I got this tool instead and it is amazing. The link for it is in the description below. But yes, to add the grommet, so I just put one grommet into the bottom of the little machine thingy, and then I'm gonna put my fabric on top of it. So the right side should face down. And I put the little O-ring on top and then just press down and voila, it's done. So here's what that looks like one more time. Just put it there, put it on top, put the ring on top, and done. This is the final result. I'm absolutely obsessed with these types of tops and I'm so happy I mastered it, and I hope you guys can too. Here's a couple other ones that I have sewn. I'm big on little details, that's why I like to add the tags from the jeans onto the tops like so. The link to the drawstrings that I tie them up with is also in my description. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, just comment them down below. Don't forget to like this video to save it and subscribe for more sewing tutorials.